Ever feel like the more you understand yourself, the harder it is to connect with others? Like the deeper you go, the more alone you start to feel. You're not crazy, and you're not alone. I've felt that too. You're in a room with people you care about, maybe even love, and yet you feel distant, like you're not quite there. Not because you've shut down, but because you've started to wake up. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting older. As your insight grows, your tolerance for pretending fades, and the world doesn't always know what to do with that, especially when it comes from a man. You've spent decades working hard, doing the right thing, showing up, and yet now, your silence, your questions, your honesty, they make people uneasy. Why? Because you don't chase attention, you don't need applause, you don't need to be told who you are. And in a society that runs on performance, a man who chooses presence is a problem. Kierkegaard once wrote, "People demand freedom of speech as a compensation for the freedom of thought which they seldom use." You get that, don't you? You've been the quiet one at the table, not because you had nothing to say, but because you were watching, listening, thinking. And when you finally do speak, it's not to impress, it's to reveal. And that, my friend, that shakes people, because truth, when spoken clearly, is dangerous. The more you see, the less you can pretend. And the less you pretend, the more others feel exposed in your presence. You're not dangerous because you're smart. You're dangerous because you refuse to be predictable. You don't fit the mold, and for many that's uncomfortable. Modern relationships, they're built on comfort, on routine, on not rocking the boat, but you've always questioned things. You've peeled back the surface to see what's real, and once you've done that, you can't go back. You're allergic to illusions. You see, love is something beyond transactional, not a game, not a performance, but something rare, something real. And that kind of love threatens a world that asks us all to pretend. Now, I'm not saying that intelligent men scare women because they're malicious. No, it's deeper than that. They're scared because we can't be contained. We don't play roles. We don't need flattery to feel appreciated. We don't need permission to feel like men. We don't chase what doesn't feel real because we've seen through the chase. We know it's often not about love. It's about illusion. And when we love with terrifying clarity. We're not searching for something easy. We're not interested in comfort, disguised as connection. We want something honest, something raw, something rare. A love that doesn't just hold hands, it holds truth, and that kind of presence is hard to handle. Most people aren't ready for that kind of depth. Kierkegaard once spoke of despair, not as sadness, but as the sickness of being disconnected from your true self. That hit me, because that's exactly what most of the world fears in men like us, that we might wake up, that we might stop performing and start living authentically. Because once a man stops needing approval, he becomes something society can no longer control. He becomes free. And that kind of freedom, it's frightening to those still trapped in the game. As a man over 50, you've probably felt this more than most. You've walked into rooms and felt that subtle shift in the air. You've noticed how silence surrounds you, how people don't quite know what to do with you, not because you're rude, but because you're real. They don't know how to label you, so they keep their distance. Most people, especially today, don't want to be seen. They're still hiding behind who they think they should be. But you've spent years facing your contradictions. You've taken off the mask, and that's why people struggle to connect with you, because when you see clearly, when you really see, you stop buying into the performance, and that scares them. You're not cold, you're clear, you're not distant, you're discerning, you're not difficult, you're done playing roles. That's the heart of it. We scare people, not because we're unkind, but because we are unconditioned. We refuse to bend into shapes that no longer fit. We won't be molded into society's expectations. We can't be seduced by noise or controlled by applause. We don't need to be liked, to feel grounded, and that makes us a threat to every system that runs on performance. including romantic ones. Now, I know it can feel isolating, especially as we age. But hear me now. That isolation, that isn't failure. It's the price of awakening. It's what happens when you finally stop chasing approval and start living by truth. Let me tell you something, brother. You scare people not because there's something wrong with you, but because you are unwilling to be anything less than yourself. And that is power. That's presence, that's freedom. And yes, it can feel lonely because you're walking a quieter path, one that demands honesty, integrity, solitude. But don't confuse solitude with emptiness. That silence inside you isn't a void. It's your soul finally speaking. You're not lost, you're becoming, and what you're becoming is something the world desperately needs but doesn't always know how to welcome. Kierkegaard knew this well. He loved deeply, so deeply he walked away from the woman he loved, not because he didn't feel, but because his love was too real to survive inside a lie. He chose truth over comfort, even when it cost him everything, and that's the kind of strength men like us must carry. To live with honesty, to choose what's real, even if it's harder, even if it's lonelier. Because once you stop chasing illusions of love and start living in alignment with your truth, you become more powerful than you ever thought possible. Most men spend their lives trying to be palatable, trying to be liked, trying to shape themselves into whatever version the room expects. They become what others want, until one day, they look in the mirror and don't recognize the man staring back. But that's not you, not anymore. You've stopped performing. You've stopped seeking permission. You've stopped asking others to define your worth. You've started choosing yourself. And that's when everything changes. You stop needing someone to complete you because you realize you were never incomplete. You stop seeking love as a way to fill a void, because now love is something you give, not something you beg for. The world doesn't need more charm. It doesn't need more masks. It doesn't need more men who bend and break just to be accepted. What it needs is men who are real, men who are rooted, men who have walked through fire and still choose kindness, men who can love without losing themselves and walk away when something insults their soul. So if you've ever felt misunderstood, feared, if you've ever been called too quiet, too deep, too much, good. It means you've stopped living on the surface. It means you've started to matter. It means you're becoming the kind of man this world needs but rarely recognizes. So let them misunderstand you. Let them call you distant. Let them feel uneasy in your silence, because the moment you stop performing for others, the moment you start living for yourself, that's the moment you become dangerous, not to people, but to every system that depends on your silence, your compliance, your self-abandonment. And that, my friend, is where your power truly begins. If these words spoke to something in you, if this message echoed a truth you've known, but maybe couldn't name, then don't let it stop here. Share this with another man who's walking through the fog, one who's tired of pretending, one who's ready to live real. And if you want more of this, more truth, more clarity, more reminders of the man you're becoming, then subscribe, because this journey, it's not easy, but it's the only one that leads to real freedom. And once you've tasted that, you'll never go back.